Okay, so real quick here, I wanted to go over the steps for what we do when a program's finished, right? If you're learning to program a little and you put a game together you think it's kind of fun, want to share it with your friends, they'd probably be a little confused if you ask them to install Raptor in order to run it, right? That's not how we put programs on our computers. There's sort of a standard format, and obviously this is not a requirement at this level. I just wanted to go over all the steps because, well, it was never mentioned in a single computer course I took. And when I sat down and figured it out, it turned into a much bigger ordeal than it needed to be. So, we're going to go over it fairly quick here, so you may not remember all the steps, but hopefully this will help ease the process if you ever need to go through and do this. Or you'll remember that this video was created and stuck on YouTube at one point. So there's a couple parts we'll need. First off is something to do with the command prompt. You may have seen these. We don't use them much anymore. All of this stuff happens in the background. This takes kind of the language we would use in this sort of prompt is what's known as a task-oriented language. It's like, go to this folder, open this file, write these words in a text file, go to some other folder, make a copy of a file. All the instructions that we would give to a computer, but they've been moved to graphical user interfaces, so we don't use the text one in the background anymore, but it's still there and we can still access it. So we can still do things. So right now it's in this user profile on the computer, so I can go in the documents folder, change directory to documents. Whoops, if I spell that correctly, /delete. My kind of generic folder, and work in different places, and then we could start things up. So like I could just type start Chrome. That's a very common piece of software, so the computer's going to know what I mean when I type that. And it comes over and opens Google Chrome. That start Chrome, that's what happens in the background when we click on the icon. So we don't type it much anymore, but sometimes we need to. Or we could start Chrome with a couple arguments. Start Chrome and go to https. I'll do one of the iRelearn.edu. I'll go to that site. So don't just start Chrome, but actually go to this other website. And yeah, we don't use this much anymore, but we'll need it to we'll need to set some of those up, the task-oriented programming. But we don't want to just type these things one at a time, right? There's a better way to pass in a whole bunch of these instructions, and that's what's called a batch file. So let's start by looking at a batch file. Oh, and I guess I should mention this task-oriented. I should spell that out to make sure, just in case it's not coming clear through in the microphone. Oriented. Task-oriented programming. That means that's summarized with a location and objective. So like, go to this folder and do some stuff. Go to another folder, do some other stuff. That's called task-oriented programming. And the command prompt, what I have open here, is an older way of doing this. All of this stuff has been revamped into PowerShell. Open that real quick. Here's the modern version. It's a lot more powerful. There's no abbreviations, kind of like to change a directory, I put CD, whereas in the new version, it's set location. Because we used to have to be very cautious with RAM. There wasn't much available, so we didn't want to waste it on programmers who knew what they were doing. But, I don't know, I guess about 15, 20 years ago, that was really no longer necessary. So they revamped all the task-oriented programming, so everything's spelled out now, and it has a lot of the format that is standard across multiple programming languages built into it now, so that it's not a completely separate thing. It fits with other ones, but there's a whole lot of lead in to do it that way. So I decided to just do the old command prompt one. But as far as languages to learn, you should probably learn PowerShell. This is how you control Windows from the keyboard instead of a mouse. And we have way more buttons on a keyboard, so we have a lot more control with a keyboard than we do with a mouse. But there's a little bit more lead in to get started, so I decided to go with the command prompt, the old way of doing it. So we can type in instructions one at a time and do, and just get things done. But it can be a little more efficient if we just give the computer a text file full of those instructions. That way it can just run them one at a time, and that way we don't have to type them in individually. So that's what a batch file is on Windows. Linux has a similar thing called a shell file, where our extension is .sh. And there's also one in Mac, it's a .command file, but most people just use the Linux shell file for Mac, a .sh. For a Windows machine, we want to save this file with the extension .bat. So I'm going to save this real quick. Where can I go? I'll go to the delete folder. And I'll call this sample. And then I'll put in the extension .bat, which stands for bat. And that way the computer knows the lines typed in here are instructions for the command prompt. So it'll just open this file and run all those instructions through the command prompt one at a time. That way we don't have to type them in. Well, really, it copies and pastes them over to the command prompt, which it can do a whole lot faster than we can type them in. So we can do the same things we just did. This is just kind of a quick introduction to them. So we can say start Chrome and save that. Then over here in the delete folder, there's this file here, sample.bat, which we can see the type is a Windows batch file. So if we double click on that to run it, you can see it open the command prompt, ran that instruction for us, and open Chrome. And then we can do several things at once. So kind of like we saw a moment ago, don't just open Chrome and go to some website. Or the point of these is to do more than one thing at once. So let's open Chrome again, and along with the site where we'll find our homework, let's go to something more fun than homework. YouTube.com/ let's go ahead and search for something. Search query. Whoops, spelled that wrong. Search query, and let's search for funny cat videos. Now when I save and run that, it goes to a couple web pages for us. Here's the site where our homework is, and then over here it did a search on YouTube for funny cat videos for us, which again, the search bar is a nice clean format to do that, but the search bar, typing that in a search bar just passes in this instruction. So I just went ahead and typed it in the command prompt, and yeah, watch things a little more, some videos that are probably a little more fun than the lecture videos. But that's the idea of a batch file. We can do a whole bunch of things at once. So we'll need that in a few minutes. And yeah, we're doing a simplified version, so we're just going to start some stuff, but there's a full language. We could put together selection structures here and make choices on what to do depending on the state of the machine. We'll need that here in a few minutes. So now let's look at one of our programs and pretend like it's a finished program, ready to go out to a user. Oh yeah, real quick, that thing I keep forgetting to put in examples, the comments in our code, those are in batch files, those are going to be known as remarks. So we just type REM, short for remark. This is a comment. I keep forgetting to include those. That way you can say what's going on in the code. In most of the software development courses I teach, what's a good way to say this? This sort of comment that is only available, you can only see it while looking through the code, seems a little out of date to me. Pretty much every language, we can put in special kinds of comments that will generate an entire web page, and then put the things we want to describe about the program we wrote into a nice looking website. So these comments in the programming language itself strike me as a little out of date. And then here at this level where we only have those kind of comments, I keep forgetting to include them. But there's a more modern version where we just generate a website. That way we don't have to look at code to see what the comments are, see the descriptions of the code. But that's what a comment looks like in a batch file. Just REM, you can see it changed green, and then put in a description of what the batch file is doing. Okay, and so now over to our example, cards. So this was that optional example in Module 4. The content that week was selection structures, and it seemed to run a little bit long, so I labeled the last example as optional. If you didn't watch that, what this program does, I'll just go ahead and run it, is the user picks a number, say 32, and that relates to a card. So it's just kind of a pick a card thing. But this will work for our example, but anything you have that runs will work for these examples. I'm just going to use this one. It was kind of right there in front of me. So like I said, if we wrote, a game we were really proud of or something, or some sort of software we wanted to share with our friends, they might be a little confused if we ask them to install Raptor in order to run it. We want to give them something that the normal application that they can just click on and run. So we can come up to the generate file and create one of those. So if we come up to generate, here's a bunch of options to put it in different languages. So like if we click the C++, over here in the folder, it created this pickacard.cpp. So if we open that in a text editor, here's what this program would have looked like in C++. So instead of going through and typing all this stuff, it can be a lot more efficient to let the computer type it. And we drag things around with our mouse and then have the computer type stuff. So I'm going to delete that one. But along with that generate, it's not just other code. We can generate a standalone version. Something the users could just click on and the program's going to run. So it said it created it. It put it in this folder. So first off, I'm going to move this up to the top level. So Control X to cut that. And I'm going to come up to the top level of my Scratch folder here. So in this thing it generated, pick a card _exe. This folder gives us a bunch of libraries, and then this pick a card _wrap, which if we check the properties on that, we'll see that is a .exe file, an executable. The sort of thing we can just click on and run. But if we click on it now and try to run it, well, first off, the antivirus software has to freak out for a minute. I guess it's done. There it goes. But, well, it didn't quite want to run. There was sort of an error there. Right? Well, this time it popped up the window, but if I type in a card number, say 21, there should be a card to go with that. It didn't do anything. It just threw up an error message there in the background and crashed. And the reason is because this program requires all these resources. In order to run, this program has to have all of these images of playing cards involved. And that's what can be a little bit tricky installing it, because we don't want to just give them this thing to start the program. We have to make sure the resources are in order. So to keep the example here kind of simple, I'm just going to mention that and that needs done. So I'm going to select all of these playing cards. Select all of those. I don't need the Raptor file, so unselect that and Control C to copy everything. And then I'll come over here and just paste it in this folder. That way, that executable, wherever it was, there it is. Now that is in the same folder as all the images that it needs in order to run. So now if I run it, I don't know why it crashed that time. There we go. Open without an error that time. Maybe things were still copying over. If I put in, say, card 17, it can find the picture of that card. So then we can close out of this. And, well, because it was created from Raptor, it tries to generate the command prompt and some other things. There's ways to hide those windows, but keeping the example simple, the first thing is we have to make sure our resources are in the same folder and available. And that's where a batch file comes in. So I'm going to create a batch file. So instead of clicking this application, it's much better to start it from a batch file. So like start, I want to get rid of these things. I'm going to rename this as cards. Rename cards. That way there's no spaces in the name. Because earlier it just gave it that name and there was a bunch of spaces. That's a little bit extra to deal with. So I'm going to rename this as cards.exe. So just changing the name, we can see still runs the same. So 34 is native diamonds. We can close out of all this. So instead of just having the user go and click on that to start it, it's much better to have them start it from a batch file. So we can do the same thing we just saw with Chrome and start cards.exe. Then save that. Well, I'll go ahead and put it in the same folder. There's much better organization methods, but to keep it simple, I'm going to put it in here. I'm going to call it cards.bat. So cards.batch. You can see it created that batch file right here. Maybe if I switch to large icons, that way we can see the picture. Yeah. So the batch file, this icon just means we have a bunch of task-oriented programming to run. So the computer will run that in command prompt, or the more modern version, Powershell, can be a little bit better, but just introducing the topics here. So now if we run that, oh, why did it crash? Okay, not sure why it crashed the first time, but that's the basic idea. And there are some parts left off here. That's why I'm not worrying too much about those. But the second time it ran, so I'll go with that. This is a very simplified example, just introducing the topic. So there's other stuff we could do. And the main point of doing this in a batch file, which again is going to be left off, because then we could put in a selection structure, which looks extra complicated in command prompt. That's why I'm kind of omitting that and just mentioning it here. Instead of just starting that, we could have a selection structure above, on lines above it, to make sure all of these resources are in order. All of these cards that are needed or images of playing cards that we need in order for this program to run are there where they should be. Okay, yeah, it didn't run the first time. I'm not sure why it did that. The error message was behind another window, so I couldn't quite read it, but it seems to be working now. So that is what we would give the user. We'd put together a selection structure to make sure all the resources we need are available, or go to the internet and download them if they're not, that sort of thing. And then that is what we would have the user start. Probably with create a shortcut and then give the user the shortcut to that batch file. The main reason for doing that is because, well, I'll click on, if I go to properties, you'll see there's no way here to change the icon. So if we wanted a specific icon, we go to, on the shortcut, we have a button to change the icon. And I have one on the computer somewhere. Oh, here's one. Documents. I must have used this the last time I did an example like this. So I have a .ico file, a regular icon file, and that gives a better picture. And then that's what we would give the user in order to start the program. Stick it over there on the desktop. And then when they double click on that, it runs the program. That looks a little more like we're familiar with. Except for one thing. All of that would just be copy and paste onto the user's system, which is what we want to do. But there's kind of a special way we do it, right? Usually when we go to install something, we don't just copy and paste that file directly on there. We open up a wizard and then go through a bunch of steps, and then it does all the copy and paste automatically for us. And again, that is a bunch of task-oriented instructions. One thing about task-oriented programming, this background command prompt stuff, is it's very tedious and repetitive. It's always kind of the same. So it is a really good thing to have the computer generate for us. So I'm going to delete this little icon that little shortcut I put there. And let's set up one of those wizards that we can step through and have a regular looking installer. Okay, so real quick, review the main point of doing the batch file. I'll just put in a comment here. Put in a selection structure to assure all of the necessary resources are in order. And then we would start the cards. .exe. So just a way to check it, but that is a little beyond the level we're currently at. But I can at least, we've talked about selection structures, so I can mention that it is possible there. We can basically say if all the images of the cards are there, right? If the 2 of diamonds is there, and the 2 of clubs, and the 2 of hearts, and the 2 of spades, and the 3 of diamonds, and all the way through the list, and make sure all the card images we need are there before we start it to prevent a crash. That's kind of the main point of doing that. And we could set up a batch file that creates the installer, but that stuff's already set up. We can find software that does it. So software to create an installer. I already searched for it this morning, so getting everything ready. So we can search for software to create an installer. And I don't think I've mentioned it in this class yet. My recommendation for stuff like this is always start with these best of lists. So like 5 apps for creating, 4 great tools. And yeah, there's usually like 10, 12, 15 lists. There's a bunch of them on there that will compare them. And start with that. So right off the bat, as you read through some of the blogs or something comparing them, you get an idea of what you should be looking for in that sort of software where you pick one. So I have one installed already, so I'm going to go ahead and open that up, and I'll close this. I'll go ahead and open that up and get everything ready. So here's one of those pieces of software. This isn't one I regularly use or anything. I looked at some of those best of lists earlier this morning, and before making the video, saw this one on there, installed it, everything worked. So I was like, okay, that'll work. So I haven't extensively used this, but it worked when I was preparing things this morning. So I found one of them on those best of list called Installforge, which is open source, so it's free to use and puts everything together. Then we can just go through and fill out this little form, and it will do all the task-oriented programming, the batch file sort of stuff, all those command prompt instructions in the background for us, because that part is very tedious and repetitive. So it is a language that is usually generated because it's always the same, and computers are great at doing things that are always the same. So we need some sort of name, so I'll just call this cards version 1.0 class example for company name, kind of fill those out. And this one makes Windows installers for Windows. So you select which version of Windows you want it to run on, and then just kind of go through here, all the spots. This user interface one, this has to do with the wizard, so you can probably just leave that in the default version. One thing you do have to check is make sure you say what language it's in. And that's consistent across all the different softwares for this. Make sure you say what language it's in, or choose several options for what language it will be available in. Then setup. There's a few things here, so we could type in special instructions, give variables. We want to make sure and include the uninstaller. There's also a standard way to get rid of things on our computer, right? We typically don't just go to where the program is installed and hit the delete button. So we want to include the uninstall software. Some things about updates. We're installing, not updating it currently. So then we just need to say what folders and files we're going to install. And I already put them all into one folder. Here, I guess there's one other thing we can copy over, that icon file, so we can use it. So I think it was somewhere over here on my desktop, under scripts. Yeah, here it is. Under images, I have this multi-size icon. So I'm just going to copy this and put it in that same folder. Paste that in there, and that way we can refer to that icon to put on the shortcut as well. So all the files are in order. There's better ways to organize them than just all in one folder, but to keep the example simple, I'm just going to put all of the files that we need to do this, the images of the playing cards, the executable itself, the libraries that executable depends on, and a batch file, which ideally would make sure all of that other stuff is there and then start the executable. But we're just trying to keep it simple to introduce the concepts, not quite a full step-by-step tutorial here. And then an icon for the shortcut when it goes over to the desktop. So all of the files are in one folder that we can use. So we'll add that folder here. So I'll just browse to where that's at. Under Documents, Delete folder, we'll pick a card. There. So that's the folder it is. Make sure the uninstaller is included. And the rest of these are more advanced features we don't need to get into right now. And down in dialogues, this is what the user's looking at. So sometimes if there's a whole lot of stuff that's going to load, you don't want the user just sitting there thinking their computer locked up. That's what a splash screen is. Those things that show up throw up a little image, and just to pass the 2 seconds or so while the computer does something in the background. I don't think we'll need that for this. We can type in a license, right? Show the license. That way the user has to approve agree to the user agreements. You can't use this software. Creator not liable. The standard user agreement, and the normal ones that we've probably seen, that we see a lot, like the GNU license or the MIT license. Those are available. We can just copy and paste the license in there, and the user will click to agree to it. Don't necessarily need any validation going on here. And when it's finished, we can run the application or reboot the computer. And checking these just gives the user the option. It just puts that option on the window when we get finished. I'll go ahead and set the run application, but that doesn't automatically run it. That just puts the checkbox there so that the user can run it after they install it. So there's some of those. And down here, some registry stuff. So in more advanced versions, we want to make sure and set everything up in the registry, but that is definitely beyond the scope of this course. I'm just going to go to the shortcuts and add a couple shortcuts. So maybe one on the desktop. I'll call it cards. And then this part it generated, that's where it's going to copy and paste it. The user will select it, but it probably goes in the program files or program files x86, the normal place where we put software. And then once we're there, we want to go in this folder that we created. The pick a card _exe, because we're copying that whole folder over. So we'll go into pick a card _exe folder, and then we want to actually open cards.bat, the batch file. And then we can set up an icon. So it would be basically the same thing. Install path is a variable, so wherever the user puts it, and then in this folder, and then we put that thing on there, the multi-size icon. It's just one I had around convenient to use. And then we can also add a start menu icon, or whichever ones. I'll just put it on the desktop for a quick example. Then once we get all that set up, then come down here to the build screen, make sure everything's in order. This is where it's going to save it. And when we're ready, then go and hit build, which is the button up here. Oh, I forgot to fill in that spot to save it. Yeah, I'll put it in the delete folder. I'll call it install_cards. Now we just wait for this to run. I'll pause while this runs. Okay, so that finished running. So I'm going to hit no, I'll run it manually here in a second. Because when we do it this way, instead of typing all that stuff in the command prompt, well, if something went wrong, we'd have to go back and type it all in again. Here we have a save button, so we can save this. I'll call it class example. And that way, if something went wrong, we don't have to start over completely from scratch every time. And over here in the delete folder now, you can see we have this in a regular installer file. So let's run that and see what happens. Okay, now that we've created that installer file, we can go ahead and run that and get this installed on the computer. So this is just meeting user expectations, right? Because really an install is just a copy and paste. We just copy and paste it onto the user's computer, but there's often some other stuff we want included in that. So a really fancy copy and paste, and users have come to expect this. So it is typically a good idea with a piece of software to match user expectations. That's what all this is about. We would get the same effect by just copying and pasting that folder on somebody's computer manually. But if we walk through here, you can see that license agreement is typed up. You can copy and paste some of the standard ones, but the user has to agree to it before they can click the next button. Once the user accepts that, we can click next. Typically we put things in program files or program files x86 because neither one of those folders have write access. So things in those folders cannot be changed, which is what we want with software. But if you have a piece of software that is going to involve writing a lot of files, you might want to put it someplace different. Then we just click on through there, create the desktop icon, and the same way we set that up, we could set up a start menu icon. Click next, let the software install, which hopefully won't take too long. There it goes. And when we're finished, that other thing I pointed out, the having a launcher only gives the user the option. They can unselect that and finish it. Most of us have probably seen install wizards before. But anything in that software we use to set this up just gives options to the user. It doesn't automatically do it. So click finish, and the software is here, should be ready to run. But I have a feeling it's going to crash the first time because computers are very consistent when they do things. Oh, no, it did open. Okay. I'm not sure what those crashes were about. Probably a detail that got skipped over while I was talking and doing things at the same time. But in general, it seems to be working. So I'll enter 32, and the computer says that's the 6 of diamonds. So you can see everything works there, and it kind of more fits the user expectations of installing a piece of software. And uninstalling, because uninstalling is just deleting it. Right? We could delete this icon, go into those folders, go into the hard drive and delete those images and all the files we just copied and pasted on there. But users probably expect to be able to go to the control panel and click uninstall. And we included that, so here there's the cards, so we can that and just let it uninstall in the normal fashion. Just meeting user expectations. That way users know what to do already if it fits all the standard ways of doing it. So you can see that has now been removed from the computer. So again, that is beyond where we're at in this course. I just wanted to include it because, like I said, that was never once mentioned in any of my computer classes. All sorts of different levels going back to when I was first taught about computers in the 80s, so I got my computer degree, to the computer classes I had to take in association with my mathematics degree. It was never once mentioned, and it turned into a huge hassle. So hopefully going over those concepts will make it a little easier for you when you're ready to do that. Or you might remember this videos here and come back and look at the core concepts, and then at that point you'll know how to fill in those missing gaps there. Just as we introduced the concepts, left off some of the more complicated things to try and keep the example simple. But that is what we do once we're finished developing our program.